I thought I was on my own for a while there.
You I guess just finding the right button.
And then there were 3.
Can you see the slides, guys?
No.
Yeah. Can you see them?
No.
Oh.
Now we can, Steve. Perfect.
Yeah, we're on slide 3 at the moment.
I don't know how to get back. There you go.
Perfect. Yep.
Very good. Just give it a minute or 2 and then we'll start. Super. For those who've joined so far, we're just going to give it another minute or 2. People are just joining in now. I'm getting a run-in dialogue. 14 people have joined so far, so numbers are creeping up, which is good. Okay, I think we're going to begin. The numbers are gradually creeping up. So first of all, I would like to welcome everybody to this morning's webinar, which, as you can see from the title on the slide, is all about starting your digital transformation journey. We want to spend the next hour with you just sharing some insights, some knowledge and some experience from the respective panelists who I have here with me today. We're one short, but I'll go into that in a moment when I do formal introductions for the panel team. But without further ado, I think we'll kick into this morning's session and fire up. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind moving me on. Welcome to the first of what is going to be 3 series of webinars that we will be running. They're going to run over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks or so, and we are effectively really wanting to share insight and knowledge on discussing how to successfully maneuver and benefit from a digital transformation journey. So we've got a breadth of experience on the panel team here and a breadth of experience of colleagues that we work with back in our respective offices. And really and sensibly, today's focus is going to be on starting that digital transformation journey. So for those of you who have joined us this morning and for those who may be listening to recording, then the session will be muted other than the presenters. But you can interact, and I would urge you please to do so. This is all about sharing knowledge and having open discussion with one another so that we get the best out of those digital transformation journeys that you're thinking about or maybe potentially already embarking on. So you can interact by submitting questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the page. And we will go through and prepare answers to those questions either at the end of today's session, and we will certainly follow up in writing as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the speakers today on the call. I am Kieran Williams. For those of you who haven't met me, I've now been working at RM for the past 10 years. Before that, I worked for an organisation called Nielsen, who, again, major players in digital transformation programmes working from a market research lens. Moved into Oxfordshire County Council, where I worked in the education division, and it was a very natural step for me to want to move into RM and work with some outstanding organisations in that assessment journey, of which many of them are now embarking on the digitisation of assessment models. And it's been my great pleasure to work with a wealth and a bank of experts of knowledge in that field. I'm joined today by James Burgeon, who is my partner in crime and has worked with RM now. Unbelievably, for those of you who can see him on screen, he looks 25, but he's actually worked at RM for 25 years. For 18 of those, he's been really heading up a complex side of our business, which is all around the designing of enterprise solutions. And in the sort of last 5 years or so, 10 years or so, he's been forefront in the migration of digital programs such as digital marking with the likes of the International Baccalaureate and Cambridge. So lots of experience from James and myself in the assessment field, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Steve Sharp. Steve is Transformation Director at Searchlight Consulting. He's part of the RM family and he brings with him over 30 years of experience. And Steve, I've also got to say you only look 30 as well. Clearly, if I've made that comment about James, I need to say that about your good self as well. Steve brings a really wealth of experience and knowledge in leading ERP programs, which, as we all know, can be very complex in nature and size and scale as well. Got some great brand names that he's been working with, and he really complements the knowledge and the expertise that James, myself, and colleagues at RM bring to the education and the assessment space. And unfortunately, Graham Bateman, who couldn't join us today, but Graham will be working with us looking forward and hopefully connecting with some of your good selves as well on some of your programs of work that you're thinking about. Graham brings with him over 25 years of experience working in a similar space to Steve, leading some very complex ERP programs of work. And I think just the experience that Graham, Steve, James and I share in this space hopefully will be a benefit to yourselves as we talk at a high level today, but potentially connect with you further then going forward to really start to understand some of the challenges that you face, some of the ambitions you have for your digital programs, and then how we can together use our knowledge and experience to benefit you moving those programs of work forward. So without further ado, we will kick into the session. The session is designed to be very interactive in the sense of I have a list of questions that I will pose to our panelists. And between us, we will share our insight and knowledge to those questions. But as I say, please do interact yourselves with the Q&A functionality that we have on the Zoom call today. Ask questions. If we don't get to them at the end, I promise you we will come back to you with follow-up, whether that be written or in-person conversation. Perfect. Steve, let's go for it. Let's fire into the first question. So it is you, Steve, and James that I'm coming to on this one. And the obvious question for me seems to be, where is the best place to start with digital transformation? And what do you think that people who are joining the call today would benefit from?
Thank you, Kieran. I'll kick off there. So, when designing your digital transformation and really shaping that initial business case, the key is to really get that laser focus on what are the opportunities or outcomes you're looking to achieve, and drilling down on that, then what are the capabilities that you want to uplift or establish, and getting a view of the critical 6 or 7 capabilities that you want to really have as your key outcomes from a digital transformation. That ensures you don't boil the ocean, you get clarity on scope, and you get that laser focus on what you're trying to drive and achieve from your digital transformation. And part and parcel of that business case is to ensure there's clear ownership of the capabilities, so that fundamentally business colleagues take ownership of each of the capability that you wish to uplift, so that then you can ensure that you have that participation from day one through to realizing the outcomes. I think the final part for me is, when establishing that business case, is to really understand the stakeholders that are going to be engaged and impacted, so that you can establish how to truly engage the broad stakeholder community, so they are ready, willing, and able to realize the benefits from the digital transformation. James, I don't know if you've got anything else you'd like to kind of build onto those themes.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, we'll definitely be going into some of those areas in more detail over the next few questions, I think. But I was picking up really and reflecting on the why point here. Obviously, from my experience working specifically in assessment and digital transformation in assessment, which I know a lot of the attendees here are specifically working in. And yeah, just reflecting on some of the reasons why assessment organizations look at digital transformation. Over the years, I've come across a wide range of reasons. For some organizations, then it's about simply about improving operational efficiency. Or for others, it can be about reducing complexity and risk, because integrity, of course, is key within an assessment business. For others, then digital transformation is simply an existential need to replace legacy technologies and platforms which are adding unnecessary risk to a business. But we also do come across organizations at the other end of the spectrum, where there's a real driver to provide cutting-edge digital solutions and technology solutions, which will best engage the next generation of learners, or potentially provide a real competitive advantage where organizations are competing for business in the professional assessment space. That we'll touch on some examples of some of those as we move further on, but it was just worth reflecting on some of those reasons. I think whatever your reason, I'd summarize by saying it is really important, as you said, Steve, to align all of your stakeholders on a very clear, achievable, shared goal at the outset, and make sure that the team stays focused on that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree. Okay, excellent. Thank you both very much. If we can move on to question number 2 then, Steve. So we talked very much there about kind of thinking about where you're going to set out that journey. I guess from a practical perspective, the question I have now is, where would you want to focus when you're getting started? My own experience of working in this space tends to be that people can get hugely excited about the digital transformation, which is wonderful. But that excitement can sometimes lead to jumping from left to right without really planning out that middle section of activity. So yeah, Steve, let me come to you again to start with, and then James, please do feel free to add in from your knowledge of assessment. Where, Steve, would you advise colleagues to really think about getting started?
So I think I'd like to start with one of my clients used to talk about Kotter. I'm sure many people have heard of Kotter. Describing Kotter as the chap that had a PhD in business change and communication. And just one of Kotter's phrases, quotes at the top there is, nothing undermines change more than the behaviour by important individuals. So taking that into account when you're getting started, it's absolutely fundamental that you have a leadership team or key individuals that are going to be impacted by the digital transformation. Establish a shared ownership and accountability for the delivery of change and the digital transformation. And then to really understand those that leadership team needs to really understand what stakeholders are going to be involved, engaged, impacted. And we have a few examples of those stakeholders on the screen that, James, you'll probably touch on in a moment. So that when we're communicating to the broad set of stakeholders, we can ensure we're clear on what are the implications or opportunities for people. How are we going to digitize, automate, improve, or maybe retain existing processes? And how will data become the oil of those processes? And how are we going to ensure that data becomes a real organization asset that designs in compliance, and we start to use appropriate technology where it adds kind of organization and value. So I guess to summarize what I'm saying here, it's fundamental that a clear vision of the digital transformation journey is established and consistently communicated. So there is a clear roadmap, and the broad set of stakeholders understands what's in it for me and how do I ensure that I can realize the opportunities that will be presented from the transformation. Again, James, please do jump in.
Yeah, I completely agree, Stephen. The stakeholder map in particular, I pick up in the assessment space. There's a lot to think about, because there's a broad range of stakeholders that are both inside and outside of the direct influence of the organization and the organization's culture. Obviously, within an organization, you may have people such as subject managers, quality assurance managers, but you also need to think, when you're looking at your processes and your organizational change, of some of those broader groups that may be in or out of the organization, such as the authors who author your test items and your assessments, potentially things like invigilators and markers, who quite often would not be part of your organization, but clearly is a community of people critical to your process and your success as a business. And then, of course, you have to think about people like regulators and in many cases, who obviously what you're doing can have an impact, digital transformation, on your ability to get the appropriate regulation around what you do. Last but not least, of course, the learner is obviously critically at the heart of all of this, and making sure that they are appropriately represented as a stakeholder in the change that you're driving forward.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So in essence, I guess what I'm hearing loud and clear from you both is make sure that your key stakeholders are informed and aligned to your overall objectives for your digital transformation journey, and essentially keep all key stakeholders informed of what that journey is setting out to achieve. And potentially, again, as you're moving through that journey, that you're sharing progress and that you're interacting with people so that they feel included as part of that journey. I know my own experience here is sometimes people trip up when people end up fearing the change because they don't know enough about the change. And I think what I'm hearing loud and clear from you is you can really prepare and plan for that right at the beginning of that journey. I guess ultimately, if everyone's on the same page, you're likely to make better progress through that journey of moving from paper-based assessments to digital. So thank you both very much. Moving on to question number 3. I guess we've sort of just touched on the kind of more communication angle of a program of digitization. From your respective expertise, what advice would you give to people? Because I think, again, from my own perspective here, I've seen programs collapse when they don't have an effective governance and sponsorship to decision making within programs. So, Steve, maybe you could add a bit of colour for us in terms of how you go about creating that guiding coalition to support success.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, for me, it's ensuring that an executive sponsor really buys in and is able to articulate the outcomes that they wish to achieve, and ensures that there is appropriate representation as part of a governance forum across the business. So it might not always be that executive committee, executive team, but in key stakeholders that can influence the outcome need to be engaged in that governance forum. And the way a governance forum needs to work is they need to take ownership of delivery. So it's not a case of, hey, we're going to have a monthly check-in, come and tell us how it's going, thanks ever so much. It's very much they are accountable in the program. They're crystal clear on what their roles are, and they are very much a part of a decision-making forum, decision-making process. We like to talk about, governance being very kind of forward-thinking, very proactive, and establishing that kind of decision pipeline. So where do executive team members need to get engaged? Where are the important decisions that they need to get involved in, so that we ensure they are super informed and very much supporting the program delivery team. So you end up with a robust, informed program that is basically making decisions based on facts and data.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. James?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, consultation is key when it comes to that coalition, and listening to all the stakeholders, understanding how the change plan is going to impact them, and make sure that everyone has a really clear view on the scope of the change, what they stand to gain, and what it will mean to them and the activities they do is absolutely essential. It's about having a shared expectation and transparency throughout. I know from my experience that I've seen examples where vague goals and time scales, or aspirational objectives, which are not clearly aligned with all the stakeholders, can definitely lead to well, at least disappointment, and can often lead to conflict. I can recall one specific program going back some years where we were introducing an on-screen marking solution for an organization moving from a paper-based process to a digital process. And as part of introducing that solution, it also introduced an automated quality assurance process where the system would ensure that the marking that was being done would be to a consistent standard across the team. And whilst the teams involved, the marking teams and the subject teams, they really embraced the technology and they loved the move from paper to digital and all the efficiency and advantages it gave them, there were certain small pockets of people who weren't aware of the consistent marking standard that was going to come out of it, and actually rebelled and objected to it because they preferred the autonomy they'd had in a less governed space of being able to do things on paper. And because that expectation hadn't been clearly managed and set through, then it did lead to some rebellion and some resignations within the team, which is kind of a worst case scenario, which caused a short-term pain, which could have been avoided. Obviously, it all worked better in the long term because they ended up with a team that was aligned on a consistent standard going forward, and it all got resolved. But certainly the short-term pain could have been resolved if that had been more clearly planned through.
Yeah, that makes sense, James. Thank you. I guess from our experience as well over the last couple of years, we've probably seen examples where executives are really brought in when there's an escalation as opposed to information. And I think that is a sign that the guiding coalition hasn't quite worked intuitively in the way that folks might have wanted it to have worked. So I share what you're both saying in terms of agreeing those roles and responsibilities up front, agreeing key milestones that you want to achieve together up front is really vitally important. And then Steve, I think you made an absolutely outstanding point there when you said about focus on data. What are the facts telling you about that transformation journey? And then talk that language to one another to make sure you're aligned and that you're in step with one another. And I think, James, the example you've just given there showed that maybe that wasn't quite well understood across the broader team, and therefore it brought conflict into the program. So thank you both there for sharing that experience. I think that's very, very valuable advice, and certainly something that in the last few months alone I have seen play out previously. So moving on to the next question, which I think I'm actually going to be asking myself and you, James. So a digital transformation sounds like a major change. It is. I can assure you it is, for any organization. Can you break it into smaller bite-sized pieces? And I think the diagram that we all see here on the screen is one that James and I live and breathe day in, day out. It's really, really vital, in my opinion, that we bring our expertise and experience in here at this point to really demonstrate the art of the possible, and where it goes well and where it doesn't go so well, and why that tends to happen. So any move away from something that's traditionally been across the globe seen as paper-based examinations taking place. I myself sat them paper-based. Steve and James will have been in the same position. But today, young folk growing up and educating and learning and moving into professional qualifications, passing those general qualifications that they need to be able to move on to the next chapter of their journey. Everything that we all do today is done digitally. So it's a very, very natural progression to want to take learning and assessment on that digital journey. And I think I alluded to it earlier when I hinted at the very, very first thing I would advise anybody to do in this space is understand what your outcomes are. What are you trying to achieve? The how you do it comes later. It can be thought through well and considered when you stand back and you say, what does good look like here? What will I think is successful? I think very often people think it's going to be a one-phase transition to go from paper to digital. And every experience I've had of it that's gone successfully has not been just one move from one to the other. So therefore, what's really, really vital from my perspective, and any advice I offer to anybody, is really understand your workflow. What is it that you do? How is it that you do it? And what is it that you want to do then moving forward? Once you understand that workflow, then experts like myself and James and Steve can really start to support and help. We can help in the mapping of that workflow and that process, but then we can really bring some knowledge that layers into that to say, where's the right place to start with digitization? It could be, these are just scenarios, but it could be that you start with automating and digitizing your standardization process. It could be that you want to look at digitizing your marking process first. It could be that you want to move from paper-based testing to digital testing. All of those things are possible, but how you achieve success in being able to move from pure paper-based examinations today to fully digitized examinations tomorrow is really, really important, that you understand the detail that layers beneath that. So my advice to anybody is understand that workflow, understand how it operates, understand where you can improve process before you begin that journey of moving to digital. Once you've understood that, then we can together work on how you begin that migration across to digital. And then the obvious next stage there is really embedding it in your organization, in your culture of your organization. That's vitally important, because in the assessment space and in the education space, you've got many influencers who are going to make this successful or unsuccessful. And it's really important that you understand the pace of which that change can take place, and that you've brought everybody along with you on that journey. Then you get to some of the most exciting areas of it, which is about transforming assessment and transforming learning. For many years now, in the general qualification space, we've had people who want to qualify in computer science examinations who've had to sit those on paper. Which logically doesn't make any sense to any of us, really, because when you get out into the real world of working, you're doing all of that digitally. So the fast-paced migration now that we see within that general qualification space of moving towards digital is really going to allow people to have that more authentic digital experience. It aligns much, much closer to what the working environment will be like. Again, if you look at organizations who maybe look at those professional qualifications, in the accountancy world, being now able to apply spreadsheets into your assessment and your learning, that's a transformation away from a few years back where people were having to do all of that on paper. So it's a very, very, very exciting journey to go on. But I think taking that breath in the early stage of really understanding your workflow, taking a back step to understand how could I enhance processes today in preparation for that beginning of digital, and then phasing that digital journey so that you achieve the milestones that you're ultimately wanting to achieve at a pace that can be coped with within your own organization. And then the exciting element of really transforming that assessment and transforming that learning journey. That's stuff that I get super excited about. I know James does as well. That's where Steve, myself, James, Graham would really love to help more and more of you set out your goals and your ambitions, understand how we can help you achieve those, and make them ultimately hugely successful, which is ultimately what all of us want here in terms of outcomes. Because what we're effectively trying to do is modernize and authenticize that experience for every candidate across the globe. And I think that digital journey allows us to do that. James, I'll hand over to you.
I was going to call on an example here, actually. Thank you, Kieran. I mean, the question at the top around breaking it down into smaller bite-sized pieces absolutely can make it much more manageable. As Steve started the conversation mentioning, you're not trying to boil the ocean here, so break it down into manageable chunks. But also the point here of thinking about the impact on people, the impact on your process, and on the technology. Is really critical to managing it carefully. The example I was keen to call on here. I was working with an organization that was very much on the left-hand side of this spectrum. So they were running a paper-based process, and they wanted to move to embed digital within their organization. Their key goal being to save time and cost. Being really specific, this organization was administering exams across 16 countries internationally, and their process in the paper world was to bring their markers from all of those countries together in one place in order to manage the marking process in a coordinated way. So they were looking to go digital to start to bring more efficiency into that process. But they recognized that it was quite a big leap to essentially go from the paper process where everyone was getting together in person to a fully digitized remote process. And so they chose quite deliberately to do things in two phases. The first phase was about digitizing the process that they had in place, getting everybody on the online system and ensuring that was up and working and people were comfortable with it. But what they chose to do within the first year of that program was still bring people together in a room and co-locate to carry out the activities they did before, except this time they were doing it on screen instead of on paper. Now, what that led to in the second year was some people as part of that marking team, and some of those marking teams stepped forward and said, why did we do this face-to-face? We could have done this remotely. We didn't now need to do that. So they chose some flagship subjects where they were able to do that face-to-face to demonstrate how it would work and prove it through, such that by year 3, the established process became everyone now accepts that this can be done remotely and the full transformation has been made. So just a really good example of how managing the people, the process, the technology together very carefully in phases enabled them to get where they wanted in a very inclusive and a very supportive way. Yeah, I'll conclude there if you want to move on to the next question, unless there's anything else to add.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, James. Great. All right. So, Steve, I think I'm coming to you again on this one. In terms of aspects you think people should focus on when designing a digital transformation, are there 2 or 3 key points that you would draw out there to offer advice and build success?
Yes. So I'll perhaps start from where not to start, what not to do. When we're often helped to review how digital transformations are progressing. And one of the key watch outs we have is when we see organizations jump straight in and focus on shiny new tech and think that's the critical focus. And really going back to Kieran, the point that you emphasized in the last topic, don't focus on the tech until you really understand the assessment workflow. And you can then break down that workflow into where can technology be used appropriately to automate and deliver more value. So it's not all about technology. It's really getting that view of what's the vision, the capabilities we talked about, understanding that workflow, and then looking at how technology can be leveraged. And it's looking at the appropriate technology, and is it something that you would want to build? We don't often suggest that. Go for a niche solution or more of a platform play. Often we see a hybrid situation and playing out, but it's key that you have the appropriate technology at the appropriate place within that assessment journey, which may vary based on the different personas, and we're going to come on to that. I think the last topic to emphasize is people and culture. It's key to make sure that as you start a transformation, you ensure that your program delivery team have the right view of what is expected and the right skills and talent. And our second webinar series will focus on how to develop a high-performing team. Kieran, anything else or to add there?
Yeah, I think your final point there, Steve, is absolutely spot on. It's particularly in the world of assessment where I think digital can be daunting because these processes have existed for many, many years, and we are all creatures of habit at the end of the day. So I think creating that in culture, making it easy for people to be open and express and share their fears, their anxieties, their excitement, and the opportunities is vitally important. And I think that the one thing about culture that really excites me with digital is the ability to be able to open up diversity and inclusivity for people. It really changes the dial and it changes the game and creates opportunity in a fair and equal way for everybody. I talk from personal experience when I say, for me, that is a really exciting angle to wanting to make that first step and continue that journey on digitization, I should say, because for me it really opens opportunities to everybody in a fair and equal manner. So I would always, I couldn't stress enough how important creating that in culture is, to really bring that to life and make it a safe space for people to all contribute. So I share and echo what you've just said there. James, anything else you'd like to add on that bit, or?
Yeah, just really to reflect, because we talk about assessment workflow, and obviously, we've worked with a lot of assessment organizations over the years, and we understand that assessment workflows are complex, and the nature of the kind of things that that they would include. Just everything really from the creation of your courses and qualifications to the management and registration of your candidates or your learners, the need to manage the process of creating tests which align with tests and assessments that align with the qualifications you're providing, delivering those tests, whether that's paper or coursework or of course digital tests as many organizations will now do, so doing those on screen. Then you've got to worry about the processes of scoring and marking and ensuring quality assurance throughout that, processing results, certification. All of those things are all the key elements, if you like, of a standard workflow, and that's just the core stuff. Outside of that, your organization may have processes for things like the recruitment, the training, the management, the payment of groups such as invigilators or markers or authors, etc. So there's a huge complexity within the workflow and the processes here. And that simple point really is make sure you're really clear on where you're focusing within that workflow for the improvement. What do you benefit from digitizing? What is working fine as it is? Where are your needs? Where is going to be your key focus here? You don't necessarily want to take on too much. Or also from our consultancy perspective, we would help to advise on what it makes sense to focus on, because integration is a key point. If you want to focus on digitizing this and that and that, and all over the place, you might be adding in complexity within an integration where sometimes an integrated solution could be available, for example, off the shelf, which might enable you to digitize a flow of things in a very seamless and safe way, which would make more sense than perhaps picking on elements here and there. So, obviously our experience in the market, we can help to advise you on where would be sensible to focus your attention and priorities. But the critical point here is in terms of working out a scope and a focus which minimizes the risk that you're exposing yourself to based on what you're targeting. So it's all about thinking about what that to be solution is and making sure that you are appropriately choosing stuff to keep that risk down. If you're not sure where to start on all of that, as I say, we're very experienced in providing advice on that and here to help. That's just what I wanted to add on that one for now, Kieran.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah, no, really good, really good. Thank you very much. Okay, next one, Steve. It's technology, which means it's you, Mr. Spurgeon, coming your way. So talk to us, James, a little bit from the experience that you've had of working with many of our key global organizations in the assessment space. How does technology fit into the design of a digital change program? And based on your experience, what would you advise people to think through? We talked about workflow and we've talked about process, but from a technology perspective, what would be your key call outs there?
Oh yeah, so I mean, obviously digital transformation is all about using technology as an enabler to improve and to achieve your goals, but you must remain focused on the goals that you are trying to achieve as an organization. So it's not technology for the sake of technology. I think that's the key thing. Yeah. Keep focus on the goals, and I would say make technology choices that are smart and appropriate for what you're aiming to achieve. Because from experience, I could certainly say that poor technology choices could actually inadvertently add complexity and could potentially set you backwards in the goals that you're trying to achieve as an organization. We have to remember assessment is a high stakes business. And integrity of the qualifications is critical to any organization's brand and is critical to the success and future of the learners that they are supporting. So, we can't afford to make mistakes in the assessment space. We need to be responsible in the way that we use technology. So caution is a key element. It's not to say that you can't be innovative, but it's just about applying a degree of caution to the technology choices that you make. So, for example, you may want to avoid moving forward too fast on technology choices that might be unproven or potentially unreliable. Where it is important to innovate, and I've already mentioned that some organizations absolutely will be pushing the boundaries of innovation within the assessment space, where it's important for you to do that, perhaps to keep the head of the game, then just do it with caution and plan carefully how you're going to thoroughly test your technology choices before you make that commitment. From my personal experience, then we've seen examples where an implementation of an innovative technology, you might start in classroom or with mock assessments, for example, where the stakes will be lower, and you can gain confidence in the technology choices before you might then choose to progress it to a more high stakes exams. So it's all about getting the confidence of the various stakeholders, learners, parents, and of course regulators is a key point as well, because quite often in the assessment space, the regulators will not necessarily be fully supportive of some of the most cutting edge technology in terms of their ability to endorse the process you're fulfilling. So I think it's probably worth mentioning the word AI here, if that's a word or two letters, because I'm sort of beating around the bush a bit on that point. AI is a really good case in point. With AI, if it's got the right use case for that sort of technology, even in the assessment space, then it can bring efficiency and it can bring consistency within your processes and your automation that simply humans can't. So therefore, there are definitely places for it. But AI very specifically as a technology is really excellent at sort of reasoning capabilities, but it can also introduce risk as well. So the key point here is to think about the appropriate technology for the problem you're trying to solve and not introduce risk where you don't need or want that risk to be introduced. We found within RM assessment, we found that for many digital applications, then automation through very clever algorithms and code can provide better, more reassuring, more consistent outputs in some cases than AI can, with the assurance that you don't have that risk associated with it. So it's not to say AI is the wrong technology choice, but it's just about thinking about your application and using things like AI where it is best appropriate to do so, and doing so responsibly and carefully in the way you do it, but also recognizing that there are some scenarios and some use cases where you don't have to move to a sort of reasoning engine in order to achieve the outcome you're looking for. So in summary, I guess what we're saying here is make smart and responsible technology choices, choices that are most appropriate to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve, and just have that awareness that new technology does come with risks. But as long as you manage those risks as you roll out your new technology for your change program, then you can make sure that you mitigate those.
Marvelous. I think that's very good advice, James Spurgeon. Very much. Super. Okay, Steve, anything you want to add to that, or we'll
just two very quick things. So from a digital transformation perspective, we've talked about how business capabilities and operating and the organizational operating model will evolve, but also from an IT operating model, it's key as different technologies are selected. The end state focuses on what capabilities do you need to establish or outsource from an IT operating model perspective. And just as I mentioned earlier, our second webinar will focus on high-performing teams and capabilities, but also pick up on the operating model theme in our second webinar.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Questions, indeed. We do have one. Well, there's a couple actually. So let me come to you both, and again, I can chip in on this one as well. Around risk management, we've just heard there, James, you talk about ensuring that you evaluate, appropriately with technology and design. I guess there's two angles to this question. One is, what's the risk of not moving to digital? And I'll come in on that one, and then Steve, I'll probably hand over to yourself. And then the second is, how do you effectively manage risk when you're setting out on that journey? Risk management is something that's going to evolve over any program, but how do you evaluate and establish appropriate risk management in those early stages as you're setting out on your ambition? I think my own experience with a couple of recent examples would be, the risk of not moving to digital is very much about not providing an authentic candidate experience, globally to those individuals that you want to reach out to, that you want to offer those opportunities to. I think, as we alluded to earlier on in the conversation, every one of us today is evolving towards, digital in every form of our life. So suddenly then sitting examinations in a test center, in a classroom, or wherever it may be, and doing that in a written format rather than a digital format feels a bit alien. And therefore, I think it becomes quite unattractive for candidates potentially, particularly as you start to move to that higher education and professional qualification space. I think it feels like holding back. So not moving to it, I think, is an impact on candidate experience. I think moving to it too quickly is also a real risk. So I'm almost contradicting myself a little bit by saying you must go there, but don't go there too quickly. But that's really genuine advice. I think really understand the environment that your candidates operate within, whether that be school or whether that be professional. Understand what you want to achieve from your digitization journey, and then evaluate the solution, the work process and the solution that you're putting forward, because they may clash, and you may not know they clash until they have clashed. And it can feel very painful, and it can feel like a rewind situation. So understanding the environment, understanding the opportunity, and again linking those to your outcomes and your objectives, for me, would be really, really important risk strategies to bear in mind as you're starting to set out on that journey. Steve, James, anything you'd add to that around risk management?
Yeah, just building on that point. You mentioned there, Kieran, you've got different stakeholders, different personas that need to be considered when going on the digital transformation journey. And from a business change adoption perspective, you need to consider the different lenses to look through, so that those stakeholder groups will be ready, will be willing and able to adopt digital ways of operating. And it's not just a one-shot thing. You need to think about through those different lenses to mitigate the risks and the inhibitors for different stakeholder groups. From a mechanics of managing risk, within a program, the typical program structure, typically you'll have a number of work streams. For me, risks need to be really owned, and you need accountability within those work streams. It's not a case of just delegating up to a program management function and ducking the obligations. It's making sure there is effective management of risks, looking up, looking ahead, and having thoughts of what could be coming down the track. Yes, then using appropriate escalation to a program governance forum to focus on the potential blockers to progress through different kind of stages or transition points. But ownerships for mitigation needs to be throughout an organization, and you only summarise up at the where there are potential kind of major risks to a transition stage being impacted.
Super. Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. One other question that we've got that has come in, and James, I think this is coming your way. Is you talk a little bit more about where teaching and learning comes into the digitisation journey. So how does that need to adapt to be able to support new assessment methods and methodologies, I guess, ultimately? What advice have you got there, James?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. We almost see the reverse of this today, where these days teaching and learning obviously is a much more digital space within the classroom. Then technology now plays a key role, as you would expect. What we would hear in the assessment space is that it's very backwards and very unauthentic for then the learners to be taking a paper-based exam and writing for hours on paper at the end of all of that. So I guess I've sort of reversed the point a little bit to sort of get to the answer to the question. But certainly what you would expect and what you would require is that, to your point around the authenticity and the technology use, Kieran, it's about having that same technology use consistently, not just through the classroom, but all the way through to the high stakes assessment point as well. So when you're talking about technology use and digitizing of assessment, then first of all, that needs to be matching up to the experience in the classroom. But essentially then what you would hope and expect is there's an alignment in terms of the experience of those solutions and those methods of digital assessment happening in the classroom, which is a continuity of using the same tools, technologies, feedback mechanisms that go all the way through to any high stakes or summative assessment that may be at the end of that process. So the key element here really is about bedding that technology in through the learning and through the classroom, and making use of the technology, for example, the ability to provide feedback during the learning process, to measure learning outcomes, to aspirationally potentially get to a point where you start to then question the need for the summative assessment at the end. Now, certainly from a UK perspective and many places internationally, we're far away from not having a summative assessment at the end of our exams, at the end of our education. But certainly the more you can bring that assessment through the learning process, then the more it starts to enable different ways of thinking of things, different ways of thinking and assuring that those learning outcomes are being achieved throughout the education, and not relying on a rather disconnected assessment at the end to validate that point. So yes, I think that's the key point, is working to bring that technology and the assessment process through into the classroom, into the formative space, and not just view it as being something that's used at the summative endpoint. And that way you get the confidence and the buy-in of the learners and the teachers, their familiarity with not just the assessment process, but their confidence in the competency and the ability of the assessment process to rate achievement and to be able to give valid feedback on learning outcomes and achievements, and gives them that confidence that the digital assessment tooling is very much able to provide an accurate, fair, meaningful assessment and feedback to the student and to the teacher on learning progress.
Marvelous, very comprehensive. Thank you very much. Good stuff. Okay, well, I'm very conscious of time. We have 2 minutes left. So any other questions, we can follow up in writing. But thank you both very much. Any final thoughts or comments, Steve, from you, or James, from yourself?
Just as I mentioned, this is one of three, a series of three webinars. The key points that we will be touching on in the next session will be developing high-performing teams as part of a transformation, and realizing the operating model design changes and ensure benefits that design can be realized. So look forward to engaging in the next webinar.
Marvelous. Good stuff. Okay.
Super. Should we just move to the next slide very briefly?
Yeah,
just for the,
let's do that. That leaves me to just say thank you, everybody, for attending the session today. As part of registering for the webinar, you have entitled yourself to a free consultation workshop with Searchlight Consulting. So we will indeed reach out to you later this week to see whether or not that is something that you would like to participate in. And as Steve has quite rightly said, this is one of three. So the next session in the webinar will go into the diary. We're thinking it's early November, but we'll go into the diary very, very soon. And that is really about transformation in motion. So making sure that people are ready for both the process and technology change that digital offers. So watch this space, watch out for that. I hope you found today's session insightful and interesting. And once again, James, Steve, and myself would like to thank you for attending with us this morning. Thank you all very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye for now.